exercise and forward thinking. He called it a bucket list. We were supposed to make a list of all the things we wanted to do in our lives before we...
Kick the bucket. Cutesy.
I was gonna redo the list, but then...
Help a complete stranger for the good. Laugh until I cry. Not to be judgmental, but this is extremely weak.
But it's pointless now.
I would argue the exact opposite.
What are you doing?
Little rewrite, that's all. How about skydiving? We got months, right?
A year, maybe.
You think 45 years went by fast? We could do this. We should do this.
I don't know.
What don't you know?
It was meant to be metaphorical. Just trying to get a handle on...
Blah, blah, blah. Metaphors. You're the one crying you never took a shot. Here's your chance.
My chance to what?
We're both in the same boat. How's that for a metaphor? We got a real opportunity here.
Skydiving, huh?
All right.
Great movie, weird actor, don't you think? Hey, good evening, everybody. Glad you came tonight. I was looking forward to being with you tonight. Real quick, before I jump into my talk, I want to give a real quick shout out. You know, we have a couple of other campuses. Real quick shout out to our Ann Arbor Saline campus. Welcome to the service. And then, of course, our Brighton Howe folks. Welcome there. I'm glad you guys have joined us as well. We are going to talk about in this service what could be the number one source of frustration in your life. Do I have your attention now? This past week was a great illustration. It was not a big deal, but it was just frustrating. I was traveling 3 different places, and my trips, fell somewhere between hilarious and fiasco. Have you had a week like that? If you didn't laugh, you cried. I was in San Antonio for 3 days, Sunday to Tuesday, and I was getting to spend time with my great friends at the Chick-fil-A company, the owners, operators there. And when I got done, I darted to the airport, made it in time, hopped on the plane, buckled myself in, and thought, this is great. I got the first leg of this 3-leg trip done, and it's great. And the plane started taxiing out, and I'm feeling good because it's on time. I've got a 1-hour layover in Atlanta before I go up to Louisville. I want to make sure everything's just going to work. We got out, and we were taxiing out of the runway. It looked like nothing could stop us when all of a sudden the pilot came on the intercom. This is not when he's supposed to make any announcements. We're almost ready to take off. He's supposed to be paying attention to driving the plane. He says, folks, I got some bad news for you. We got a button in the cockpit that just broke. We're going to have to go back to the gate. I mean, he must have been from the South. That's exactly how he said it. So we kind of wheeled back into the gate, and I'm thinking, oh, I got a layover. Hurry, 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 hurry. Come on. 30 minutes later. Great news, folks. We fixed the button in the cockpit. We're going to Atlanta. Let's go. So we pull back out, and we're kind of inching along, and I'm thinking, okay, the layover may be quick, maybe short, but I think I can still make it. We get out, and I mean to tell you, we are 1 airplane away from taking flight. We hear the pilot's voice again. Folks, I got some bad news. The button has broken again. I'm not kidding. We wheel back into the gate. They fiddle around for another 30 minutes until he comes on the intercom and says, we can't fix this button. Everybody get back inside the airport. So we grab our luggage, we lug inside, and you know what I'm thinking. I'm thinking what you would be thinking. Oh my gosh, I'm going to miss my next flight. I'm not going to make the layover. So we stand around for 45 minutes at the gate. I have now long missed my next flight. They finally come on the intercom at the gate. They said, you know what? Good news and bad news, folks. The bad news is we just can't fix this button. The good news is we're going to borrow a button from American Airlines. And literally there we saw a guy just dart down to another gate in the airport to try to find American Airlines folks to see if they got in their toolbox a button for the cockpit. Well, 15, 20 minutes later, they come back and they go, folks, American Airlines doesn't use the same buttons we use. We cannot get a button from American Airlines. I'm thinking, do you not know this? The frustration level, I got to admit, is getting a little bit high now. Well, another few minutes go by, and they finally say, here's the game plan, folks. We got a game plan. There's a flight coming in from Atlanta, and it was supposed to retire for the night after they dump the customers off here. But we're going to take that airplane. We're going to fly back to Atlanta. You're going to get to Atlanta after all. Well, I got to Atlanta about 1 o'clock in the morning. My flight was supposed to take off at 9. I mean, I've long gone. So I spend the night in Atlanta. I grab a flight early the next morning. I make it up to Louisville about 2 minutes before my speaking engagement, but I did make it. I had to giggle, though. When I finally grabbed the boarding pass of the flight that did make it, I looked, and right underneath, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but right underneath the boarding time, they put the words, subject to change. That was an understatement in my case. Well, fast forward 2 more days. It's last night. I'm flying up here to Grand Rapids. I spoke in Grand Rapids this morning. And I'm on the flight. I buckle in. Everything looks like it's on time. The flight attendants are happy. They're smiling. The pilots, all the buttons seem to be working in the cockpit. We start taxiing out, and I mean to tell you, we're now primed and ready for the tower to say, go. And just before it says go, we hear a voice. It's not the pilot over the intercom. It's somebody from the back of the plane. Stewardess, stewardess, we got a need back here. The airplane stops. There was someone that needed medical attention in the back of the plane. And of course, we needed to stop for that. 1.5 hours later, they take the man off, and I have missed the layover. And I finally got, I think 1 o'clock in the morning, I finally got here. But once again, I had to giggle when I looked at my boarding pass and was reminded with the words, subject to change. Don't you wish life came with a manual that said, subject to change? Just keep in mind, this whole thing is subject to change. That's how my life runs right now. And it's especially hard because I'm the kind of guy that likes to plan and actually kind of control things. I live my life with very few margins. I mean, I have, if things don't work out now, I'm in big trouble. I share that with you not because you haven't had a day like that. In fact, I'm sure all of you have had days, maybe weeks, maybe months like that. The frustration does not lie, for me, with the fact that things happen that weren't planned. The frustration lies when I start putting the encounters, experiences, and events of my life in the wrong bucket. Can I say that again? The frustration in my life lies, whether it's big or small, when I put the events, encounters, and experiences of my life in the wrong bucket. Let me show you what I mean. You may have noticed on this stage tonight, I have 3 very simple buckets. They represent the buckets that lie in every one of our lives. Very, very simple, but let me explain. The bucket right off here to my right, to your left, is a bucket that simply is entitled, or you could call it, stuff in your control. There are certain things you would agree that are things that you can control. Can't control a lot of things, but there are some things you can control. Stuff that would be in this bucket would be things like your emotions. Okay, your spouse may not believe you can control your emotions, but you really can. Okay, stuff like time with friends. You can control time with what friends and how much time. Those are things in your control. Things like your attitude, once again, may feel like it's not in control. It is in your control. Your diet. Shall I move quickly past this one? Exercise. Ooh, it gets better. Okay. And then, of course, things like your reactions to life events. Now, all I'm simply saying is there are certain things that belong in this bucket and no other bucket. In fact, you will get in trouble or frustrated if you put the things that really ought to be in this bucket in another bucket. Let's move over to this one. The second bucket over here could be called things out of your control. And you would all agree, because you've walked on this earth long enough to know there are certain things that while you wish you could control them, you can't control them. True? These would involve things like, well, certain car accidents. Maybe not car accidents that you start, but it's true. Have we not all been in an accident, or at least a fender bender before that it wasn't our fault? You can get frustrated, you can get mad, you can wish, you could want to roll back the clock, but doggone it, there are certain accidents that happen in our life that are out of our control. Agreed? Things like cancer or other diseases that might happen just because we're here, because we're human, because we came from a family line with the DNA, and it's in the DNA. But the point is, you didn't sin on Thursday, and that's what caused your cancer. It's just in you. It's just a part of the line. It's out of your control. Things like job layoffs. Now, somebody might have gotten fired because they weren't competent or didn't do a good job with their work ethic, but sometimes it's not your fault. You need to quit beating yourself up. This is out of your control. It was a layoff done by the company. Some of you know this firsthand, do you not? Ball games. You can't control. Men, you can't control ball games. I don't care how hard you yell at that TV. The Lions, I'm just going to stop right there. Gossip, you can't control gossip. Right, wouldn't you like to? In fact, have we not all had moments where I wish those people would stop that? You can't control it. It's viral. It happens digitally as well as face-to-face. Gossip happens. Type 1 diabetes. That's stuff that's in the family DNA. You get the point. There are certain things that will absolutely frustrate you if they belong in this bucket and you try to put them somewhere else. Have we not all had that experience? And then the third bucket, which we rarely talk about, it's almost like a hybrid between the first two. These would be things that you might entitle within your influence. You don't control them, but they're not completely out of your control, but you respond well to life when you understand there's certain items that are within your influence. For instance, your reputation. Certainly people can think what they want to, and they can believe rumors and lies, but you can live in such a way that you can build a reputation. Agreed? Children. Moms and dads, am I right? When they're babies, they're totally in your control, but the more they grow up, from age 2 on, would you not agree? They are no longer totally in my control, they were within my influence. And moms, can I just say the obvious? If you're trying to live controlling your children, you will be frustrated almost daily. Missed a great chance to say amen to that one, okay? It's true. What people think of you, that's kind of like the reputation. You can kind of, within your influence, the room's atmosphere. You can influence, but you can't control it. Now, there are certain items that don't belong there or here. They really belong here. And frustration will emerge or surface when you put stuff that should be here in the other two buckets. Now, having said that, let me do something really, really simple. I don't mean to insult your intelligence, but for me, even though I've been around for 5 decades on this earth, I need to review these buckets constantly. Because even in midlife, beyond midlife, I sometimes confuse things, get them in the wrong bucket, and start responding wrong. With the things in this bucket, things that are in your control, the best response you can give, pardon me if I sound like a football coach, is to be responsible. You need to responsibly respond to the items here. Moms and dads, hang with me for just a minute. Don't you get upset with your own children, however old they are. When they come home, they make a bad grade on their test. They get a D- or an F. And you go, how'd you get that grade? My teacher gave it to me, Mom. That teacher did not give you a grade. You earned that grade. Have you not had this conversation? Now, what they're wanting to do is put it in another bucket. It does not belong. It belongs in this bucket. And the best thing to do is take full responsibility. Stop passing the blame. Stop ditching it to someone else and saying, if my boss would just, if my mother would just, if my girlfriend, if my wife would just, don't do that. That leads to frustration. Stuff here, be responsible. The way you respond to this one, out of your control, in fact, the only way you can respond to eliminate frustration is to trust God. I don't know where you are in your spiritual journey. We have people at Northridge every week that have been walking with God for decades, and they're just loving the Lord, and others would say, I'm kind of new at this thing. I'm back in church after a decade, or I'm new to this Jesus thing. But to whatever degree you're able, you've got to learn to trust God with the things that only He can do. And you'll be frustrated if you try to play God with things that you can't control. This bucket, the stuff in your life that is within your influence, the best way you can respond here is to act wisely, to do the wise thing, to make the wise choice. That means you look outward at the consequences and benefits, and you make the wisest decisions you can looking outward. Now, I know that's all basic, but hang with me. We get into trouble. Scratch that. I get into trouble, even though I consider myself a fairly mature guy, when I start misplacing certain items that should be in one bucket and I put them in another one. For instance, some of you here tonight might be parents of adult children. In other words, they're your kids, but they're now past 22, they're maybe 25, 30, 35, maybe 40 years old. Would you not agree some of your greatest frustrations when you put those adult children in my control bucket? You can't control them. They're adults now. They may have walked away from you. They may have walked away from God. They may be ditching every value you try to instill in them, and you can't control them. And you'll only get frustrated if you try to control a person you can't control. Now, they're within your influence, no doubt about it. You have a sense of influence. You have a certain level based on the life you've lived with them. But you can't control them. Here's another one. Ones I often see misplaced in the wrong bucket are job opportunities or even friends. I see more people putting my friends, that category, in the out of my control. Well, I don't know. I can't control who people walk into my life. That's true. But you can control the friendships you cultivate. I find way too many people just letting friends accidentally get close to them. Listen, you can control the people that you really get close to. Certainly there's going to be extemporaneous and serendipitous encounters, no doubt about it. And you want to love and be kind to everybody you meet. But I'm telling you, as I age, I became way more intentional with the people that I allow to be close friends with me. Time is too short. I want to be around people that are building me up and that I'm building them up and that we're actually helping each other. You follow what I'm saying? Friendship should not be accidental, nor job opportunities. I see people in this sour economy saying, well, I'm just going to sit here, I'm going to pray hard, and I'm just going to let God bring that job to me. He's not going to do that. Yes, he's able to do anything. He will not do that. True? Some of you had 20-something kids, and you think, get up off your doot and go get a job. And I'm saying some of it is it's at least within our influence and not in our control. We need to pursue those things that God is not going to just drop some nugget from heaven and just drop the employer right in front of us and he just loves us and it's all going to work out. There are certain things we've got to say, that's my shot. This is my baby. Let me do another one. Ever been in this situation? You are in a car accident or there's a job layoff, not a firing, a layoff. And you begin to beat yourself up. You don't do it out loud because you know it's wrong, but inside you feel guilty, you're beating yourself up, and the layoff was not you. You are you have good work ethic and you've got great gifts. But the more time you spent in an unemployment situation, you just lose your self-esteem. And listen, you are just as competent as the day you were getting paid at good salary. You're just as competent today. You're in a season and it is not your fault and you need to stop frustrating yourself or beating yourself up when you got that thing in the wrong bucket. Now you follow what I'm saying. You get this. I'm simply saying, for me, I give myself frustration when I misplace these buckets. Now here's one more little thought and insight. Those flights I was on this last week that were terribly frustrating to me, I'll admit I was frustrated, missing layovers and missing flights and arriving at 1 a.m. in the morning. That's no fun. There's stuff in all three buckets in every one of those events. For instance, that flight that had a man on it that needed medical attention, I can't control that. That's out of my control. To get mad at that man, bless his heart, or to get mad at the flight attendants or the flight or anything, that's silliness. I may want to, but I cannot pass. That's not my control. Now, what's in my control is my response to that, my attitude, my action. You follow what I'm saying. All three buckets are going to be involved in every encounter, event, and experience you have. What are you putting in the three buckets? Now, tonight, I want to look at some scripture. I have a little Bible here. I want to look at some scripture. And I'd like to look at one particular character and how he learned this bucket lesson all through his adult life. In fact, he's such a vivid illustration. We're going to look rapidly at 4 stories from his life where you're going to see him learn and learn and learn along the way how to use these buckets well. And because he learns the lesson, he is a picture of peace. He has internal peace. I know that sounds like an old-fashioned term. He actually lives as an adult with great inward peace inside. And external joy. He's exhibiting joy and passion about his life well into his latter years. His name was David. You remember David? If you don't know much about the Bible, you've heard of King David, you've heard of David and Goliath, David and Bathsheba, David and Saul. Remember these stories? Let me talk to you about David real quick, and if you pull out your notes, if you have your Bible, great, but if you pull out your notes, we've actually put the scriptures in your program, and I want to read them with you real quick right now. The first passage I want to look at is a really interesting passage tucked away. There's a little story. You might have not even read it. It's in 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 19 through 23. This is when one of David's babies, one of his young children, dies. Listen to the story. 2 Samuel 12. It says, "Now David noticed that his attendants were whispering among themselves, and he realized the child was dead. 'Is the child dead?' he asked. 'Yes,' they replied, 'he is dead.' Then David got up from the ground. He must have been on the floor. And after he had washed, he put on lotion, changed his clothes, and went into the house of the Lord and worshiped." Now, I want you to stop right now. That's interesting, isn't it? After he's prayed and fasted for days, he goes in, after his child dies, D-I-E-S, dies, and he worships the Lord. How can he do that? He's either wacko or he's discovered something very few of us discover. Keep reading. "Then he went to his own house, and at his request, they served him food, and he ate. Now his attendants asked him, 'Why are you acting this way? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept, but now the child's dead, and you get up and eat. They don't understand this. They don't understand the buckets. Listen to how he responds. He answered, while the child was still alive, I fasted and wept. I thought, who knows? The Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live. But now that he's dead, why should I go on fasting? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him, meaning I'll go to heaven one day and see him again, but he will not return to me. Now, you may think that David was way too curt and fast on this, but the point is, David understood something. While it's within my influence, I'm going to do everything I can. Once it's out of my influence, I'm not wasting one more ounce of energy on an issue that's no longer mine. Do you follow what I'm saying? This is so critical to spiritual maturity. Let's look at another story in David's life. If you're taking notes, the next story was David and Goliath. This is probably the most famous story in David's life. In fact, even if you don't consider yourself a religious person, church person, Christian person, you've heard of David and Goliath. This is a great story because it took place early in David's life. He's probably a teenager. He may be 16, 17 years old when he has learned this lesson. The passage is 1 Samuel 17, 32 to 36, and then 45 to 49. It's in your notes. Follow with me. David then said to Saul, who was the king, by the way, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine, meaning Goliath. Your servant will go and fight him. And Saul replied, you're not able to go out and fight this Philistine. You're only a young man, and he's been a warrior from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it and struck it and rescued the sheep from his mouth. And when it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. Now, don't you love this? All the soldiers have put Goliath in the other bucket. They put Goliath in the out-of-my-control bucket. True? That guy's 9 foot tall. There ain't no way I'm going to go out and try to hit that guy. David's thinking just the opposite. Man, he's too big to miss. I'm going to throw a rock at him. I'm going for it. And David puts Goliath in my control bucket. You may disagree. I'm just saying, for this young lad, everything in him said, I've got a covenant with God, a huge God. Like, my God's bigger than 9 foot tall. He called Goliath an uncircumcised Philistine, which simply meant he didn't have a covenant with God. I think the odds are with me, not against me. And David puts this Goliath in a different bucket. Stop down, question. Have any Goliaths in your life right now? Have you put that Goliath in a different bucket because you just do not see how God could do anything at all with this? You've given it up. You put it in the other out of my control bucket. I can't do anything in it. Read the rest of the story. It gets good. It gets really good. Next section. David said to the Philistine, that is Goliath, you come against me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. And this day, the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. He gets pretty graphic here. This very day, I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And all those who gathered here will know that this is not done by a sword or a spear, but that the Lord saves. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. And reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. And the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. Isn't that a great story? Can I remind you? It's a true story from history. And David was able to go out because he had Goliath in a different bucket than his older brothers, who had way more experience fighting. They were trained soldiers than all the armies of Israel, who were older, wiser, and more experienced. David was the only one that knew what bucket Goliath belonged in. All I'm saying is, your life will become an amazing adventure if you'll put the stuff in the right buckets. You'll do things that people think you couldn't do because you realize you and God together, you can do this. Other things, you're acquiescing, you're trusting, but the point is, which bucket is your stuff in? Now, one more story. There's a little-known story that happens later on, actually in 1 Samuel chapter 25. David is not yet king. He's going to be king. He's been prophesied that he's going to become king, but he's still this young man, and he's kind of a renegade. He's running around with a bunch of his friends that are all kind of warriors, And they approach a man named Nabal one day, and they say, Nabal, for some food, we will guard your flocks, your livestock, and watch over your land for a few days. Nabal says, that sounds good to me. At the end of the days that they had agreed to, David asked Nabal for some food in exchange. Can you give us some grain, some food? Nabal rejects it. He says, I'm not going to pay you anything. I don't know why he did this. Maybe he was just self-centered or egocentric, but he says, I'm not going to pay you anything. Well, David gets royally ticked off. I'm sorry, he was human. And he gets so angry that he decides, he grabs his soldier friends and he says, let's go take Nabal. Let's kill him. Let's kill all of his men. Let's burn down his barns. Let's wipe out everything. Thankfully for Nabal, he has a wife named Abigail. And Abigail, on behalf of her foolish husband Nabal, she approaches David and she gives him a little bit of big picture perspective. She says, wait. Is this how you want this thing to go down? You, the future king, are wiping out this family here. The story's going to get around. She talks him out of it. She gives him food and she says, get on your way. Take this food. Go. My husband has lived up to his name. By the way, the name Nabal means fool. Just get out of here and leave us fools alone. Well, watch how David responds. It's brilliant. He gets the bucket thing again. 1 Samuel 25:32. David says to Abigail, praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from the bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak. And then David accepted from her hand what she had brought to him and said, go home in peace. I have heard your words and granted your request. And when Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was in the high spirits and was very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until daybreak. And then in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. Can I unpack that for you in 30 seconds? Abigail simply went out to David and said, David, you're putting in a bucket that you think is in your control something that's not in your control. You need to leave this to God. Take the food, get out of here, don't avenge yourself, leave this to God. And by the way, God did a beautiful job 10 days later. All I'm saying is, here is David, a hero in Scripture who has to learn just like we do through the school of hard knocks what bucket everything belongs in. And he avoids frustration and lives in peace because he gets it in the right bucket. Now, I want to close tonight by looking at one more story from David's life. It is a brilliant, vivid picture of a guy who interprets what bucket things belong in differently than everybody around him. Underscoring the fact that you might be in a situation very soon where all of your friends, your spouse, your buddies, your colleagues, your coworkers see something differently than you, and you know darn well it belongs in a different bucket than they think it belongs in, and you need to take a stand. Here's what happens. David is a young man. Again, he's not yet king at this point. He is, in fact, being chased by the king, King Saul. You remember the story, don't you? David has a job in the palace. He's playing the harp for the king. Saul has gotten jealous of David. He's good looking. He's a musician, so he's on MTV already, okay? He's already defeated Goliath, so all the girls are liking him because he's beat up on this big giant. Everybody's like, I mean, he's the Justin Bieber of his day. Let's just call a spade, okay? He's just wildly popular. Everybody loves this guy. He's making movies, and Saul is just getting envious and jealous. And so Saul starts throwing javelin. He starts throwing spears at him. He's trying to take his life. He knows David's in line to take his position. So Saul starts chasing him. David runs for his life. David's got a cadre of soldiers. They're out in the rocks and the caves and the hills of Israel. Remember hearing about these caves when Osama bin Laden was hiding and so forth? These caves are all over the Middle East. Back then, David is hiding in hundreds of different caves along the way from this king named Saul who has thousands of soldiers following him. And it all comes to a climax one day. It's an amazing story. This belongs on TV. Saul is traveling with literally thousands of his army. David only has a cadre of a few hundred of his men, and they see Saul coming with thousands of soldiers. They're way outnumbered, so they ditch it in a cave. Now, there's hundreds of caves. They just ditch at one of these caves and just hope to God that Saul's going to pass by and never find him. Well, as they're hiding in the cave, lo and behold, what are the odds? They stop right in front of the cave that David and his men are in, and Saul, get this now, has to go relieve himself. This is our middle schooler's favorite Bible story in the scriptures, okay? He's got to go to the bathroom. So read it right there in the Bible. Saul says, I got to go to the bathroom. Hold on. So mingle among yourselves. So all the 1,000 soldiers just kind of stand around playing cards, whatever, as Saul goes into the cave. Now watch this. Saul goes into the cave. He takes his robe off. I mean, he's doing his business. David's there with all of his men, swords, spears. They got weapons in their hand. This looks like a God moment, don't you think? David's men start saying, David, here it is. God has finally blessed you. He has finally smiled on you. Here is Saul. He's taking his robe off, his spear's on the ground, his shield's on the ground. He's pretty vulnerable right now, David. I think it's your chance to take him, okay? David could have gone up. Listen, can I just play this out? This could have been a movie. David could have gone up there without Saul even knowing, sliced off his head, walked out of the cave, held the head of the king in front of the armies of Israel and said, I just took his head off. Anybody else next? And David, listen, they would have bowed their knee, knowing David was going to be the next king, and said, you are now the king of Israel. It would have happened in 15 minutes. David's soldiers are telling him this story. This is your chance. This is God. This is God. In our words today, this is a God thing, David. But can I remind you something? They have interpreted, listen, they have built a theology based around circumstances, not around the wisdom of God, the word of God, or the law of God. And David responds back after contemplating which bucket this situation belongs in my control, I can just take his head off. What? He puts it in the right bucket. Here's what he says. I am not going to touch God's anointed. God put him in place. I'm not going to replace him with my own sword. I'm going to trust God. He said he's going to make me king. I'm not going to make me king. He's going to make me king. And David turns down this brilliant opportunity that he has. Instead, what he does is he takes Saul's robe, which Saul has set down, cuts off a corner of it. And when Saul finally walks out and mounts his horse, David walks out, holds up the part of Saul's robe that he's cut off. So he's proving to everybody, I could have done this. And says, Saul, look at this. This is your robe. I was in that cave and I could have taken your life, but I didn't. You're the anointed of the Lord. But I got to ask you a question. Why are you chasing me today? It's at this point, Saul just breaks down and weeps because he realizes what has just happened. David could have taken this in his control, cut off his head, but he put it out of my control. This is God's deal. This is God's deal. And Saul weeps, and from that day on, stops pursuing David. The next step is Saul dies and David becomes king. Now, all I want you to see is this. David was able to find the right bucket this day because of three things. Number one, the wisdom of God. He looked down the road. And when you look down the road, by the way, when you look down the road, you usually make better decisions. If you make decisions in light of what's happening today, like short-term benefits, you're going to suffer long-term consequences. If you make decisions on long-term benefits, you're going to have short-term, you're going to be better off. David thinks to himself, I'm sure, three things. Number one, this goes against the law of God. I mean, forget the king. God says, thou shalt not murder. That kind of includes Saul. I'll be taking the king's life. I'll be taking a man's life. I'm not going to do it. Number two, David must have been thinking, is this a story I want to tell my grandkids, my kids? I mean, can you imagine? Decades later, David's now not only a father, he's a grandfather, he's got his grandkids. Hey, granddaddy, tell us again how you saw King Saul going to the bathroom and you cut his head off when he's going to the bathroom. I mean, is that the story you want to tell? And thirdly, David's got to be thinking that if I remove this king from office this way, how am I going to be removed from office? Probably the same way. What goes around comes around. David instead completely trusts God. When he could have taken matters into his own hands, he doesn't have a trust issue. He completely relinquishes control. And God beautifully places him in office. Now, bottom line is simply this. You and I, every day of our lives, face events, encounters, and experiences where stuff belongs in these buckets. And when we start putting things like cancer or whatever in the wrong bucket, we're going to be in trouble. It's just going to get messed up. And we take stuff over here that we should be acting responsibly and doing stuff, and God's counting on us to act, not him, and we start putting it over here, we're going to be in trouble. We're going to get all messed up. And frustration rises, even for us adults who claim to be mature, when we get this thing wrong. I'm guessing most of you in this room have heard of a man named Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl got famous because he was one of the very few people that lived through the dark days of the Nazi regime and Adolf Hitler, World War II. He was placed in Auschwitz, one of the Nazi concentration camps, and most of the Jewish people and others that were placed in that concentration camp died. They were tortured, beaten, murdered. They were experimented on. You know the stories. It's just gruesome. It's graphic. It's horrible. But Viktor Frankl, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, he's a doctor, studies and observes. And here's what he said. He said in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, which I highly recommend, he says, as I observed the fellow inmates around me in this concentration camp, I noticed that those people who couldn't figure out the buckets, they didn't use the word buckets, but where things belonged in their life, they grew depressed, they grew frustrated, they grew stressed and anxious, and many of them grew suicidal. In other words, forget them taking my life, I'm going to take my life. Some of them kind of coiled up in like a fetal position and just died. But Viktor Frankl never lost his poise. If you read his story, never once. And he didn't claim to be a great man, but he said, I understood what buckets things belonged in. And in one very memorable day, a day that was written up in many books since that time, Viktor Frankl was being tortured by the Nazi soldiers, by Nazi officers. He was in a dark room with a spotlight on him, and he was being beaten and whipped. And when they were finally finished, and they asked him to come clean with some information, he didn't do it. He simply said this, you can take away my practice and my family. You can take away the food that I eat and the clothes that I wear. But there is one thing you cannot take away from me, no matter who you think you are. And that is the way I choose to respond to what you do to me. Now, I know that may not be a newsflash, and it may not be very poetic, but did you understand what he just said? He said the way you get the bucket thing where there's peace inside is you realize, regardless of how out of control everything is, the one thing you do control is how you choose to respond. Notice you choose to respond. Not how you emotionally go crazy, you choose to respond. It's all a choice. I want to read something to you. I have not read this for years, but I pulled it out just in preparation for this service. I thought it would be relevant. There were once two men, both seriously ill, in the same small room of a great hospital. Quite a small room, just large enough for the pair of them. 2 beds, 2 bedside lockers, a door opening to the hall, 1 window looking out on the world. One of the men, as part of his treatment, was allowed to sit up in bed for an hour in the afternoon, something to do with draining the fluid from his lungs, and his bed was next to the window. But the other man had to spend all of his time flat on his back, and both of them had to keep quiet and still, which was the reason they were in a small room by themselves. They were grateful for the peace and the privacy, none of the bustle and the clatter and prying eyes of the general ward for them. Of course, one of the disadvantages of their condition was that they weren't allowed to do much. No reading, no radio, certainly no television. They just had to keep quiet and still, just the two of them. Well, they used to talk for hours and hours about their wives, their children, their homes, their jobs, their hobbies, and their childhood, what they did during the war, where they'd be on vacations, all that sort of thing. And every afternoon, when the man in the bed next to the window was propped up for his hour, he would pass the time by describing what he could see outside. And the other man, well, he began to live for these hours. The window apparently overlooked a park with a lake where there were ducks and swans, and children throwing them bread and sailing model boats, young lovers walking hand in hand beneath the trees. There were flowers and stretches of grass, games of softball, people taking their ease in the sunshine, and right at the back, behind the fringe of trees, a fine view of the city skyline. The man on his back would listen to all of this, enjoying every minute. How a child nearly fell into the lake, how beautiful girls were looking in their summer dresses, and then an exciting ball game or a boy playing with his puppy. It got to the place where he could almost see what was happening outside. And then one fine afternoon, when there was some sort of parade, the thought struck him, why should the man next to the window have all the pleasure of seeing what was going on? Why shouldn't he get a chance? He felt ashamed and tried not to think like that, but the more he tried, the worse he wanted to change. He'd do anything. In a few days, he had turned sour. He should be by the window, and he brooded and couldn't sleep and grew even more seriously ill, which none of the doctors understood. And one night, as he stared at the ceiling, the other man next to the window suddenly woke up, coughing and choking, the fluid congesting in his lungs, his hands groping for the button that would bring the night nurse running. But the man just watched without moving. The coughing racked the darkness, on, choked off and then stopped. The sound of breathing stopped, and the man continued to stare at the ceiling. In the morning, the day nurse came in with water for their baths and found the other man dead. They took away his body quietly, no fuss. And as soon as it seemed decent, the man asked if he could be moved next to the bed, next to the window. And they moved him and tucked him in and made him quite comfortable and left him alone to be quiet and still. And the moment they had gone, he propped himself up with one elbow painfully and laboriously and looked out the window. It faced a blank wall. Everything the man saw, he saw on the inside. It was all a choice. I don't want to over-spiritualize this, but you got any blank walls you're looking at? Can you see a park? Do you have any Goliaths you're facing? Do you feel like they're completely out of control because you're way shorter? Do you have some things that have happened that are not your fault, but you are beating yourself up every single day, needlessly? I'm just saying, you get these things in the right bucket, you're going to be okay. I have faced my set of struggles with buckets. I won't go long, but let me just real quick in a rat-a-tat sort of way share some of my misplaced buckets. In 1980, I was a junior in college, and that year I contracted type 1 diabetes. Still have it. It was foreign to me. I'd been the picture of health. I was an athlete, and I was making good grades, and everything was going well, when all of a sudden, in October of that year, my body started doing strange things. I finally went into the doctor to get his prognosis, and it took him only 5 minutes to say, "You are a diabetic." Well, you can imagine the days I spent in the hospital when they were trying to get me adjusted to not eating sugar and taking shots and how this would be the rest of my life. I squirmed and wrestled with God for hours and hours and hours. First of all, saying things like, "God, I'm on your team. What are you doing?" And then it was, "God, I believe you're healing. Why aren't you healing? I believe you're the healer." I mean, I wrestled for days until I finally got the diabetes in the right bucket. I'm still trusting God for healing. I still believe he does. You've seen him do it, haven't you? But I'm putting the diabetes thing, it's not my control. It was part of the family genes. It wasn't because I sinned on Thursday and ate too much ice cream or whatever. It's because it's in my family. I've had a number of months, this is much lighter now. I've had a number of months, this is a little bit shameful, please don't take notes, where I've gotten speeding tickets, like lots of speeding tickets. I've had months where I've gotten three in 1 month. I'm on a first-name basis with the police officers. I mean, we all know each other. I mean, I'm terrible. But let me tell you something. After that, I would get mad. I can't believe this. Those guys are hiding. Of course they're hiding, waiting for boneheads like me to come by. I'm funding the ball that year. I don't know. But listen to me. That's my control, isn't it? I need to take my dumb foot off the pedal. I'm pushing it down too hard. And I'm being silly with you, but men, do we not do this? We start shifting the blame and just take your foot off the pedal. This is ridiculous. 1990. I've shared this before, but I was working with Youth for Christ. I was speaking to students, high school and college students, for 2 solid weeks every day. And it was marvelous. We had a great week the first week on the North Island of that nation. And then the 4 of us on our team flew in a commercial plane down to the South Island for a second week of crusades. We were going to meet in a big tent in a field and just share Christ. It was going to be great. Well, on the plane ride down to the South Island, I pick up a newspaper. And I happened to read an article about the spiritual condition of New Zealand. And this journalist happened to say that New Zealand was in far worse shape than Australia or England or America. And I remember getting very heavy inside, feeling emotional about this. In fact, I remember praying in prayer, God, use me while I'm here, not just to impact this next camp, but to impact this whole country. Do you ever pray huge prayers like that and have no clue what you're talking about when you're praying? Do it all the time. Well, the four of us got off the airplane when it landed and climbed on board a single-engine Piper plane. It was very small. They had 4 seats. We filled the plane. And we started flying through the sounds, and we started to bring the plane down. Grant was the pilot. I sat right behind him. And as he started to bring the plane down, I looked over his shoulder and noticed that we were going to land on a grassy field. There was no runway. I tapped him on the shoulder. I said, Grant, I just noticed there's no runway down there. He said, I know, it's no big deal. I've done this 4 times. Oh, good. Good, 4 times. That's marvelous. I'm glad you've done this 4 times. That's 4 more times than me. Well, he starts to bring the plane down. And he suddenly realizes he's not going to be able to bring this plane to a stop before the forest begins, which is right on the heels of this field. And so he quickly jerks the plane. He starts taking it back up. He leans back and says to us, fellas, you may want to tighten your seatbelts. I'm going to take this plane back up, circle around. We're going to try this landing one more time. Well, as he takes the plane up, we are soaring up as fast as we can go to miss the tops of the trees. We got that plane about 120 feet in the air, and we were yanking on our seatbelts, getting them as tight as we can go, when all of a sudden the instrument panel on that plane just lit up. The engine had stalled. The buzzers were buzzing, the lights were flashing, and Grant, the pilot, screamed. Yeah, that's how we knew we were in trouble. The pilot was screaming in the cockpit. That's how you know if you're taking notes. Well, the plane just starts to drop. We start tipping and spiraling down. We dropped 120 feet. The left wing hits, bashes up into dozens of pieces. The torso hits, the wheels fly off, the propeller fell off, and the fire started. We spun around. Grant's seatbelt broke. He was thrown right through the windshield. The rest of us were thrown around the plane, but when it finally stopped spinning on the ground, we were all alive. It was amazing. But watch this. People started running out to the plane, pry the door open, pull our bodies from the plane. I remember immediately thinking, God, what are you doing here? What's up here? What are you doing? And I'm ashamed to say the first thing I thought was, well, if Grant knew how to fly this thing, we wouldn't be in this situation right now. Wrong bucket, can't control that, get in the right bucket. Immediately, I knew I just needed to be still and trust God to see what he was going to do. That plane crash is out of my control. You would agree with that. Well, long story short, the helicopter shows up from the emergency unit in the hospital. There was room for 3 guys on that helicopter. Guess who got left behind? Yours truly. Bye, fellas. Have a great day in the emergency unit. Have fun. So they took off. They bandaged me up on my left side, took me over to the house next door to rest for a little while. Well, while I'm in the house next door, I'm just minding my own business, trying to keep things in the right bucket here. There's a knock at the front door. And when the homeowners answer the door, who should be at the front door but news people from the 2 national television networks wanting to do a story on the plane crash. Evidently, this was the #1 news story of the day in New Zealand. Tells you how much is going on in that country right now. Anyway, they got cameras, mics. The anchorman's there. He goes, hey, do you have anybody here at this house that saw the plane crash? They said, saw the plane crash? We got a guy in the back bedroom that was in the plane crash. They said, really, seriously, can he talk? They said, can he talk? We'll go get him. So they ran back, and they kind of shook me. Elmore, get up. You got to do an interview, you know? So get this. This is so funny. I couldn't walk. They leaned me up against a tree in the backyard. So I'm trying to look as cool as I can, you know, leaning up against a tree. And the interviewer just said, tell us what happened. Well, I don't know about you, but that sounds like an invitation to me. Does that sound like an invitation to share? I shared. I mean, I talked about the protection of God, the saving grace of Jesus. I went from Genesis to maps in the back of the Bible. I covered the whole cotton pig and thing in about 5 minutes. And do you know something? I got to share Christ with 3 million New Zealanders at the 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 11 o'clock news. Now, let me ask you a question. Yes, thank you, Lord. Would I plan it again that way? No, I wouldn't. But see, I don't have control over that bucket. That's out of my control. I'm going to respond within my influence to the buckets I have. I'm just saying, I'm not saying. Tonight, I want to pray with you. Today, I want to pray with you. And I'd like to pray 2 prayers very quickly. Number 1, I want to pray for all of you But as you leave this room and you begin to think about the frustrations you're facing right now, you make sure they're in the right buckets. But for many of you, you might be here like we have every weekend here at Northridge, and you would be saying, man, I'm kind of new to this Christian thing, or I've not been in church for a while, or I don't know if I know God. I don't know if I'd go to heaven if I died. Can I just tell you something? This salvation thing is out of your control. You cannot save yourself. You can't be good enough. You can't be religious enough. You can't do enough Christian things to earn heaven. I'm sorry, give up. It's out of your control. But because it's out of your control, 2,000 years ago, God made a move. He sent Jesus Christ to this earth to die on the cross to pay the penalty for our sin. So what is within our influence, what is in our control, is to respond to what he did by inviting him to come in. You're not saving yourself. You're simply saying yes to his invitation to ask him to come in and take over your life. And if in this service you want to do that, I want to lead you in prayer right now. Let's pray. Father, first, I just want to pray for the people that are here today that just maybe need to hear from you. And the frustrations of their life that have built up, perhaps it's because they've just put stuff in the wrong bucket. Help them now. Help them with trust issues or control issues to get the stuff in the right bucket. And now, folks, if you would like to pray with me and invite Christ to come into your life, to step over the line of faith and become one of his, where you know that you know that you know you belong to him. I'm going to pray a prayer, just phrase by phrase. If it expresses the desire of your heart, pray this with me. Dear God, I do want to know you. I, Father, confess that I have sinned. I have walked away from you. And right now, I am grateful that you sent Jesus to the cross to die for my sin. And just now, I invite you to come into my life to be my Lord and my Savior. Thank you for dying on the cross. Thank you for the gift of everlasting life with you. Now, God, make me the kind of person you want me to be. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Now, congratulations if you just prayed that prayer. Smartest decision you'll ever make in your life. Do one more thing for me. If you just prayed that prayer in this program that you got, on the inside you'll notice there's a little flat with it's got two orange ribbons right here. It's the one that just tears off. The bottom ribbon simply says, today I prayed to receive Jesus Christ in my life for the first time. If you just prayed that prayer with me, I'd love for you to check that box, fill out your contact information, and just tear it off. And then on the way out, two things. Drop this in the box. There's a little box on all the doors coming in. And then in the lobby, you're going to notice a banner that says Starting Point. We'd love to help you get started in this new relationship with Jesus Christ. It's not a religion, it's a relationship. And we'd love to just help you get started by giving you a Bible and walking through answering questions. So go to the Starting Point banner out there. There'll be folks there that would love to answer questions and help you get launched. One last thing before I turn you loose. I'd love to see you at that parenting conference in March. We're going to have a great, great Saturday morning together. You guys are awesome. God bless you. I love you. Have a great week.